Good afternoon. It's heartening to see so many fellow Americans and Buckeyes. Are there any Blue Jays in the room from Johns Hopkins? Oh, there is. Thank you, Ms. Rubin. There we are. To come out in the middle of the day to hear two leaders of higher education discuss the future of America's research universities. My name is Lee Strang, and I'm the director of the Salmon P. Chase Center for Civics, Culture, and Society, the host of this afternoon's important conversation. I'm going to say a few words to introduce the Chase Center and then introduce the president's conversation. The Chase Center arose to address two, in my view, related concerns. First, many Americans appear to lack essential knowledge about our common civic tradition. And second, we Americans seem to have lost our capacity to discuss and debate with each other as fellow citizens in a civil and productive manner. Together, these have led to a worrisome polarization of American life and a precipitous drop in trust in American higher education. The Chase Center is a multidisciplinary university center that conducts teaching, research, and public programming concerning the great texts and great debates of Western civilization. The principles, ideals, and institutions of the American and Ohio political order, and the foundation of responsible leadership and informed citizenship. The center was established by Ohio in 2023, and in the short time of its existence, the center has laid the foundation to benefit the students and faculty of the university and of all Ohio citizens. The center is now hosting its public-facing programming, like today's event, on issues pertinent to citizenship education and bringing together extraordinary thought leaders to share their insights in a civil and productive manner. The center's first classes will be offered this fall, and over time, classes will be offered to all Ohio State students, undergraduate, graduate, and professional. In this fall, the center is welcoming its founding faculty, who are extraordinary scholars from America's and the world's leading academic institutions. The center's dramatic growth is the product of many supporters, both within and outside the university, who I wish to briefly thank, including especially President Carter and many of our members of the boards of trustees, our legislative leaders in the State House who have been supporters since 2023, Governor DeWine and Chancellor Duffy, and Ohio State's academic leaders, faculty, and students who are partnering with the Chase Center right now to enhance Ohio State's education for citizenship. Building on this robust support for citizenship education from both Ohio and Ohio State, I'm excited to share that just this last week, the Chase Center received an endorsement from the Stanton Foundation, one of our nation's foremost supporters of First Amendment rights. Thanks to the generous gift of the Stanton Foundation, the Chase Center will be able to cultivate open dialogue through exciting public events like today's conversation with our distinguished guests. Turning now to the President's conversation. Today's conversation, co-sponsored by the Center for Ethics and Human Values, the Institute for Democratic Engagement and Accountability, and the John Glenn College of Public Affairs, like all of the Center's events, provides a critical contribution and valuable viewpoints to our university's debate and discussion on important issues of law and policy about which Americans reasonably disagree. In today's topic, the education of future citizens in America's leading research universities is one of the most pressing matters facing our university, our state, and our nation. It's therefore my pleasure to introduce the leaders of two of America's great research universities, President Ron Daniels and President Ted Carter. Both speakers are ideal contributors to today's conversation. President Daniels is the 14th president of Johns Hopkins University, a position he has held since 2009. At Hopkins, he has strengthened interdisciplinary collaboration in research and education, enhanced student access, deepened engagement with the city of Baltimore, and supported economic and social innovation. As a law and economics scholar, he's the co-author of 8 books and dozens of scholarly articles on the intersections of law, economics, development, and public policy. His most recent book, What Universities Owe Democracy, takes up the challenges facing democracy and argues for an indispensable role that universities play in sustaining democratic societies at this critical moment in our history. He previously served as provost at the University of Pennsylvania and dean and James Torrey Professor of Law at the University of Toronto. President Walter Ted Carter Jr. is the 17th president of The Ohio State University, a role he has held since January 1st of 2024. Before coming to Ohio State, President Carter led the University of Nebraska and previously served as superintendent of his alma mater, the U.S. Naval Academy. Throughout his career in higher education, President Carter has led efforts to support student success, increased opportunities and affordability for students and families, and grow the impact of university-led research, innovation, and clinical care. He is currently building a 10-year strategic plan for Ohio State that will draw on the university's motto, Education for Citizenship, to define the future of higher education. President Carter is a retired Vice Admiral of the United States Navy with 38 years of service. In their conversation today, the presidents will share their perspectives on the place of citizenship education in their respective public and private research universities. They'll speak for approximately 50 minutes, leaving 10 minutes for your pre-submitted questions. So that everybody can enjoy today's event uninterrupted, we ask that any sound on cell or other devices be turned off, and that all members of the audience observe rules of decorum proper to conducting this event. Because our goal today is to learn about citizenship education from key leaders, and in doing so, model the civil discussion essential to informed citizenship. Please join me in welcoming Presidents Daniel and Carter. So as our guest, we decided that President Daniels would get our first question. So the two of you lead America's great research universities, one private and one public. Please share your view on the roles of research universities in our country at this moment.
First and foremost, Lee, it's really great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And Ted, it's a pleasure to be on a podium with you and to have an opportunity to connect with you again. Been a great admirer of your leadership in a number of different contexts, so it's an honor to be here. So let me start, and just following on a brief discussion we had at lunch when we were talking about the blurry lines between public and private institutions, and I reminded the folks around the table that 52% of the budget of Johns Hopkins University comes from the federal government. So my question to you, Lee, is who is the public and who is the private on this dais?
Both and, right?
Because we are very dependent, extremely dependent on that relationship with the federal government. And it's been an incredible relationship that we have enjoyed really since the end of the Second World War. And you'll know the story in terms of the foresight of Vannevar Bush, who imagined coming out of the war and the way in which during the war he had been so successful in marshaling the capabilities of academics across the country in the service of the success of the military campaign waged by the Allies, and several key innovations that changed the course of the war came from academics affiliated with our institutions. And his concern was ensuring that at the end of the war, that same capability was harnessed for the good of the country in a non-wartime setting. And so the vision of the next frontier, the endless frontier that he imagined, was one in which the federal government would step into a major role in financing research activity across our country. But significantly in contrast to what a number of other countries did, instead of saying we're going to create this lab run by the government in this location, the idea was we'll use federal funding, we'll allocate it nationally on a competitive and meritocratic basis, and we'll basically let 1,000 flowers bloom and see what happens. And the genius of that, the true genius of that, in terms of what it has done for the country, the incredible economic innovation that it has spawned, the success that we have seen in so many different fields of scientific endeavor, the life-changing drugs, vaccines, therapies that have eradicated, fundamentally changed the prognosis for people suffering from what were hitherto dreaded diseases, and the opportunities created for Americans. And finally, the security that it has ensured for our country in the military domain. All of that has truly emanated from this amazing relationship. So, it's something that I think we have not done well. We're acknowledging we're not great communicators about what we have produced from this relationship. And I think sometimes the country, maybe even sometimes some of us in our institutions, lose sight of it. But this is extraordinary. It's unusual. I say this actually as now a dual citizen of both Canada and the United States. But as a Canadian, before I came to the United States, we constantly looked to what was happening in the United States, what the NIH was doing, what the NSF was doing, what NASA was doing, the level of investment, the quality of investment, the activity that was spawned by that, and saying, we only wish we had something on the scale of what's been done in the United States. So this is extraordinary, but we're also seeing it's more fragile than any of us ever realized. And it's something that, of course, we worry about in this moment.
You know, for us here at The Ohio State University, this is such an important topic. Both our institutions, as we look at, you know, one private, one public, and as Ron and I already discussed, we have much more in common than we have different. You know, we're both institutions that are well over 150 years old. We both serve what I would call the common good. And yet, the research arm of what, you know, research universities do across this country, I don't think is a well enough told story. And you can see it's a little bit under attack, to be quite honest, right now. But, you know, with what it is that we do and how we do it, it is so important. It's the pathway for many of our PhD and graduate programs. It is the centerpiece for how the biggest and most important inventions in the history of the world, where they're coming from today. And of course, let's not forget, as we're sitting here and listening to myself and Ron talk, we're talking about Johns Hopkins University here. They've been the leading research university in this country now 45 years straight, and it's not even close. We're proud of what we're doing at Ohio State. We're growing at the rate of almost 9 or 10% in our research arm per year, and it's not just what we do for the nation and the globe, it's what we're doing for the state. So when I think about the mission of The Ohio State University, the teaching and learning part, the clinical care that we do, the research arm is part of that three-legged stool that we cannot exist without. And Ron's exactly right. We're not telling the story well enough in terms of what it means to have indirect cost rates. It sounds like it's overhead when it's really not. It's really part of the formula for what it takes to do the actual business. And yes, we have a great relationship with the National Science Foundation, the National Institute of Health, Department of Defense, NASA, and many, many other federal entities. And as a public, we are beholden to those dollars for us to be able to do this work for the nation. The United States has a gift for the future and the current work of research. We're the best in the world at it, and every nation in the world knows it. That didn't used to be true, but as you point out, since World War II, we have become the big dogs on the street. And if we're not careful, we could lose that. So it's going to take institutions like Ohio State, like Johns Hopkins, the Harvards, the Yales, the Ivies, the AAU institutions, of which there are 71 today, that are going to have to get together and be able to communicate this story in a better frame, because the impact of what we do in terms of vaccinations, in terms of what's coming with artificial intelligence, in terms of what's coming out of everything from our 7 medical colleges just here at Ohio State, is so important to the future of our nation. I would argue that the true safety and democracy of our nation is dependent on this work.
So you both identified many tangible benefits from the research missions of our respective universities. Changing to the other side of the coin of our conversation, both of you have, in your writings, in your remarks, and your actions, shown a deep commitment to citizenship education. How would you describe university-level citizenship education? Maybe Ted, if you want to go first.
Yeah, I'll start first. You know, when I think about education and citizenship, you know, for me, this becomes a bit personal. So I'm not afraid to talk about this a little bit. You know, I graduated Annapolis in 1981. I took an oath, and I never planned to stay in the Navy very long, to be quite honest. It was supposed to be a couple years and maybe get out and go do something. And it turned out I was in, you know, the Navy for 38 years. And when I had the opportunity to go lead a place like the U.S. Naval Academy from 2014 to 2019. By the way, I got a chance to visit Ron's campus at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab many times, so we had that connection there. You know, part of that mission of a place like the U.S. Naval Academy was create not just the future officers for the Navy and the Marine Corps, but it was also to create the next great citizenry for the country, knowing that those young men and women won't just serve in uniform for some period of time, that when they get out, they would go to the highest levels of government and citizenship and leadership. So I had that first love of education as an administrator there, and I took that with me to Nebraska. And of course, when I came here and I learned the history of what has gone on here since 1870, you don't have to go too far back to see one of the most critical times in this university's history was in 1938, when education for citizenship became our motto. And it was George Washington Reitmeyer, our president here, the only of the 17 presidents we've had here at Ohio State, who was actually an Ohio State grad. And you go back and, again, remind ourselves of the history of why that became our motto and why that matters. It's because it's our mission. Our mission is to take these young people who are on our campus and show them a force for good. To kind of just capture a simple phrase, a force for good. And what does good mean? That means that they're going to go out and become a great citizen, which means doing something bigger than themselves. And this generation, I believe, is wired for that. Similar to the greatest generation that fought in World War II. You know, generations tend to move in fours, and this generation is now appears to be born out of that same cut of cloth. We're at a critical time in our nation. We're in a time of, I would call it entitled rage, where everybody's mad about something. You know, our politics are more divided than ever, and yet this generation wants to be involved. And it doesn't mean that they have to wear a uniform to be a good citizen. It just means being engaged, being a community leader, maybe running for office, being part of a nonprofit, letting your voice be heard. Even raising a family is all part of being a good citizen. And our job here is to expose our students to every angle of an argument, every angle of a discussion, to let them know that this is an institution that teaches them not what to think, but how to think. And those are the precursors for what I think it takes to be a good citizen.
Thank you, Ted. Ron?
So I, of course, echo what Ted said a moment ago, and I think it's a stirring and important vision for what our institutions can do. I think I would only add to it that for me, I come at this looking at the role of universities in democratic society and seeing, you know, the extent to which over the last decade in particular that we've seen democracies around the world drifting to authoritarianism. And we've seen fragile democracies ceasing to be democracies, robust democracies becoming fragile. And it's in that context that you ask the question, what can institutions do to ensure the survival and the flourishing of these political arrangements, of these institutions that we associate with the idea of democracy? And it's here that, for me, I think education plays a significant role in, just as you said, Ted, you know, in a very, you know, simple way, you know, educating for citizenship, educating for democracy is something that we have to ask the question, are we doing all that we can to respond to the challenges that we're facing domestically, internationally, in terms of the apparent and surprising fragility of democratic institutions? And so it's here that I think, you know, the obvious point is that you don't inherit an understanding of democracy through the gene pool. You've got to be educated for it. It requires an understanding of the institutions that undergird our democracy. It requires an understanding of the values that we're seeking to represent and embody. It requires capacity in operating as citizens who can navigate difference, see how you are able to build coalitions in support of shared objectives and so forth. All of these things require education, and here's a really striking thing that I think is really on all of us, which is, if you look at K-12 education in the United States, at best, only 25% of students graduating each year from American high schools will even have a rudimentary exposure to these ideas. I mean, that's woeful. How are we preserving our democracy when we're not deliberately inculcating in our students, in our youth, an awareness of the aspirations, the accomplishments, the failures, the lessons from the failures in our youth? So this comes back to the university. If high schools aren't going to do it, and we've got these amazing populations of heterogeneous populations of students from all over the country and indeed around the world, should we be doing something to acquit the responsibility of ensuring that at least at our institutions, they actually leave with the kind of competencies that you wish and dream that every American citizen had? And so I think it comes back to this is a moment in which we have a responsibility to do our fair share to ensure the strength and vibrancy of American democracy by educating for democracy.
Yeah. Thank you both. You both have talked about the value of the mission of the research university. You both talked eloquently about citizenship education. So putting the two conversations together, one of the experiences that I had in talking with faculty about the new Chase Centers, what is the citizenship education, it wasn't so much opposition to citizenship education, it was the question about how do those two go together. So both of you have talked about research and citizenship education. How would you view how can one university have those two missions simultaneously and it work together well?
So I'll start. I think this is in the best tradition of this country. There's lots of room for experimentation and for local initiative. You know, what is right at one institution may not necessarily be right at another. You know, in the case of Hopkins, we've come at it a number of different directions. We've really focused first and foremost on the first couple of days that our students come into the university as freshmen. And we have a day that is, we call Democracy Day, when we basically locate the university's role in democracy and talk a lot about that, talk about what are the bedrock values that we're seeking to promote at the university, how they align with the broader enterprise of our country, freedom of thought, expression, tolerance, figuring out how you bridge across difference and so forth. And then use that as an opportunity to start literally, and this is the bridge between research and teaching, but to have a series of opportunities, engagements for students to start having difficult conversations with people with whom they disagree. Like that's week one. And you know, it's starting to try to ensure that by the time they graduate, if not well before, that they're kind of just used to this mode of interaction where despite the fact that we disagree, we can still work these issues through and see where it is that we disagree fundamentally about our different values, where we've actually got the same values, but we disagree upon some empirical claims about the state of the world, and just figure out how you negotiate those differences. So I think, you know, something like that is a starting point that's an important signal for what we expect of ourselves and our students. And from there, we're just doing a fair amount of program in a number of different ways, everything from a civics minor to a requirement that every student before graduating has to take a course in a democracy-related field, to lots of events that we are sponsoring by the administration, but also encouraging students to do, where they are creating opportunities to have debates, conversations, where different political views are represented on the dais in those events. So we're trying to normalize this exchange, and again, be a corrective for the deep polarization that exists in this country, where, as you know, we're deeply, deeply divided, but we're not even talking to each other. We're just hurling insults and getting more and more entrenched in our positions. And again, using the time that we have a captive student body that's living cheek by jowl with one another as an opportunity to develop this ability to navigate these differences.
Thank you, Ron. Ted?
I couldn't agree with everything that Ron just talked about more strongly. I'll add a couple other interesting thoughts here to this. Again, as the state flagship for the state of Ohio here, you know, Ron started to talk a little bit about you know, the trends in higher education. You know, we're talking about the demographics, who wants to go to college right now. You know, the percent of kids coming out of K-12 that are prepared for college, which is on the decline. We could also talk about what's commonly called in higher education the enrollment cliff. This is the concept that there are fewer people born between 2007 and 2009 because of the recession that was occurring, and therefore that college age right now, there's fewer graduating out of high school. And it depends state by state. We see that a little bit here in the state of Ohio. The point of all that is many public and some smaller privates are really struggling with enrollment. And this conversation we're having is germane to the future of the democracy of our country, but we shouldn't just assume, if we don't tell our story correctly, that we're going to fill our universities with students. Because when that stops happening, we're going to have fewer universities, and now you really see the decline of higher education. So my first point I want to make is we have to be attractive to young people, and even those that are working class adults who want to come to a place like Johns Hopkins, which is a fantastic top-ranked university, and a school like The Ohio State University, which I would say is on the rise in terms of our academic prowess, is certainly on the rise in terms of our research arm. And then this idea of creating the Chase Center, where we're now bringing in other, courseware, is something that says, hey, we can do all these things at once. And I'm going to be very honest with this audience. What is it about The Ohio State University that makes not only Ohioans, but people from all over the country and all over the world want to come here? And it isn't just because we win in football. It helps. But what it really is, it's the experiential. It's what we bring here to go to class on campus. It's the 1,400 clubs and organizations that we have that students can engage in. And then it's this type of courseware where students can go, they can have a meaningful dialogue and not necessarily agree with what's being discussed and oppose it, and that's okay. In fact, last year we started a new module here on campus called Listen, Learn, Discuss. And it's a pretty simple concept. How can you learn how to have a civil conversation and disagree, but maybe disagree in a better way? And it's been pretty successful. I think as we tweak it a little bit more, we'll see even more being taken into it. And it's just a chance to learn how to have your opinion, listen to the opinions of others, still hold on to your opinion, but not be a jerk about it. Because in real life, that's not how you get anything done. And sometimes it takes, half of an experience in your career to learn that. But I think we have a responsibility to start teaching that here, even at Ohio State.
Yeah, thank you. Well, let me broaden the lens just a little bit. So we're at a remarkable moment in higher education with significant investment in the humanities around civic education at public universities, often as a result of major legislative appropriations. We're witnessing a sudden reversal of a decade in which everyone presumed the humanities were dying on the vine, and instead, public universities are ushering into being new centers and institutes focused on civic education. And leading private universities like Johns Hopkins or Stanford, and Harvard, just to name three, are unveiling their own major civic initiatives. All the support for humanities is occurring while major shifts in higher education policy are underway in Washington, D.C. As a public university president nurturing one of these centers and a private university president who cares deeply about democracy education, what do you see as the promise and the pitfalls of this citizenship education moment in higher education?
Well, I'll start here, and I'll just say, first of all, as the son of an English teacher, and my mom went to Brown University, she would be very proud to know that the humanities, the spoken word, the written word, this idea of studying civics, of studying history, and understanding culture and social change, they all matter. And it doesn't matter whether you're an engineer, whether you're going on to study to be a nurse or a doctor, you have to have a background in these things to be successful in any field. So I think it's something that we owe to our students. Some of it should be part of our general education requirements, but this idea of having education in civics I think is going to be catching on nationwide. You can see the trend happening already. And I'm very proud that we are deeply involved in that here. And let's face it, liberal arts education right now is, in the discussion about whether higher education is worth it. It's one of the areas that's come under more attack than some of the other, STEM-based fields, technical fields, medical fields. And yet it is still the backbone, I think, of what makes all of our universities, particularly those that are historical in our country, truly great.
So, I think, particularly coming from a place like Johns Hopkins, which has an overweight to the life sciences, in particular engineering and life sciences. And, the question is often asked of me as president, well, why at a place like Hopkins do you invest in the humanities? Why, in fact, over the last several years, have we actually grown our humanities faculty rather than contracting it? And it's really quite simple, and it's much of what you said, Ted, but fundamentally, even in the context, and maybe even particularly in the context of a school that is generating so many people who will go on to careers in science and technology and medicine, the capabilities that we now see in those fields, the decisions that are being made in terms of how you alter genetic codes, the ability to create algorithms that can perhaps transcend and exceed human intelligence, all of these decisions, these technologies that are available and that are proliferating that create truly consequential impacts on our society, you can't barely conceive of a way of thinking about those things as a practitioner if you don't have a grounding in the humanities and the ability to reason clearly, to be able to critique, to evaluate, to see the flow of logic, to understand the broader context in which these decisions are being made. So I think there's a clear understanding on the part of many of us that at a time when science seems so ascendant, the exposure to and familiarization of the teachings of the humanities has never been more important. So I think that's the scene for this. And then, this emergence of so much interesting activity in these centers of civics that have been created across the country, more than 200 faculty lines at latest count. And it's just a really interesting experiment. And again, it's very much in the American tradition that there's lots of different approaches being taken as to how this is interpreted, how it gets rooted in the university, how it connects to different disciplines, and how ultimately it will feed into this broader enterprise of, and hopefully, healing the body politic in this country and in creating at least an awareness and a capacity on the part of our graduates with a better way of thinking about how we operate in contemporary democracy. So I think that's all exciting.
Yeah. And one data point, though, the single largest...
President Ted Carter. My name is Yusuf. I am a student organizer with Ohio Youth for Climate Justice and a longtime student at Ohio State University. I would just like to respectfully request that as we're talking about citizenship education, that you join us outside. We have students, faculty, and staff who are concerned about the lack of democracy at Ohio State University and about Senate Bill 1 and about OSU's longtime investments in things like the fossil fuel industry and militarism and in the genocide in Gaza that have been hurting our people and that are against the interests and the wishes of Ohio State students. We want you to join us at the table. We want to talk to you. And
I apologize for the interruption, but if I could have your attention, please. This is a planned event for guests to hear a discussion addressing the roles of research university in our country. Intentional disruptions are not permitted, and if continued, the individuals responsible will be removed. Thank you very much.
I would love to request that you meet with us outside. President Ted Carter, we have a table, a literal table set up outside.
As I stated, this event has a planned purpose and agenda. Due to intentional disruption, I'm now asking the staff to remove the individuals who are disrupting. We're going to take a brief break, and then we'll return to our conversation.
The table is outside, President Carter. We'd like you to embody the citizenship education that we're talking about today.
Please make the right choice.
The Chase Center is committed to building university culture. It was actually a part of our conversation earlier at lunch of civil debate and discussion, one where Buckeyes of all viewpoints can share their viewpoints in a productive manner. Today's conversation is a model of civil dialogue, and to it we now return. So what I was going to say, President Daniels, is that the single largest group of students who attend the civic centers are actually engineering students, so it's apropos of the point that you had raised. So both President Carter and President Daniels, you have the opportunity, sometimes unenviable, but the opportunity to mold tens of thousands of young people in their lives. If you were to give advice to young Buckeyes and young Blue Jays about how to form themselves best as citizens, or to the faculty who are teaching them, what advice would you give?
Well, the first thing, and I apologize for the interruption, but this is the world that we live in, and I want you to know how proud I am that students feel comfortable enough to express themselves. As I said earlier, I wore the uniform for 38 years. I was committed to the Constitution of the United States, and part of that was First Amendment. So as much as, that seems like a disruption, it's okay. And that's part of what we do here. The thing I would say to everybody, and some of this is my own life lessons, is, whatever you think you're going to be doing in life, it's probably going to be different. And the foundation of the education that you get is going to be what really makes the difference for you. I was very fortunate. I went to public high school. My mother taught me English for 3 out of my 4 years in high school, so imagine that. But then to get
How did she grade you?
She was my toughest teacher ever. But to have the opportunity to go to the Naval Academy and get the basics in engineering and physics, and also get a well-rounded liberal arts education, set me on a path so that 20 years after I graduated, I was asked to go to the Navy's toughest academic program, the Navy Nuclear Power Program, and I had no idea whether I could be successful at that. But it was because of the education I'd gotten 20 years ago. It set the foundation to do that. We here at Ohio State, and I think all of higher education, have a responsibility for not only giving our students that great foundation, but there's another important piece there, and that is to plant the seed for that curiosity, that thirst for learning that will never end, that will last a lifetime. I'm not in the classroom formally learning, but I will tell you, for me personally, I'm learning every day. And the day I stop having that curiosity, I won't be effective at this job for sure. So I think that's an important part of having, the broad base of all the different academic disciplines we offer at a place like Ohio State, but also to have that fantastic range of elective courses that we offer on just about any topic imaginable. You can get anything you're looking for here at Ohio State, and I'm proud of that. I'm also really proud of the faculty that we have here. And I guess the last piece, if you ask me what advice, and I do get a chance to engage with our faculty through a number of different opportunities, again, it's to become the best at what you are. I mean, what we pride ourselves on here is having a world-class faculty, over 8,500 faculty, one of the biggest faculties in the country, and it is world-class, and it's something that we should be exceedingly proud of. But we can never rest on those laurels. We have to continue to go out there and find that thirst for knowledge.
Ron, comments?
So I think for me, and it really again reflects the moment that we find ourselves in right now in this country, where I keep coming back to this deepening level of polarization, and the sense that we're basically locating ourselves in our political tribes. And when we do that, we marry members of within the same tribe. We live cheek by jowl with members of the same tribe. We basically look for work opportunities with members of the same tribe. And we know, fueled by social media and then a range of other pressures, that we're just becoming angrier and more extreme in our tribal affiliation. And I think that's really a dangerous place for us now in this country. And we're seeing the extent to which this manifests itself in a whole host of different decisions, where instead of ameliorating those differences, we're accentuating them. And it comes back to, I think, the role of centers like yours, and the role, the responsibility that we have as educators, is we've got to find a way to say, we need to tip. We've got to tip back to something better than where we are right now, and find a way just to turn down the temperature. This sounds sort of Panglossian, but fundamentally, I really do believe that our institutions, just given the number of people who come through them, who are deeply rooted in our communities for 4 years, and it's an intense and wonderful experience, and most people look back at this as among the best years of their lives. I think that gives us a distinct opportunity to model something better, to be something better than where the country is right now, and do so particularly with enormously complex set of issues, but very diverse populations that straddle different political views, racial, religious backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, so that if we can get this right and really model this kind of capability, I think we have a shot at putting the country on a different trajectory than where it is right now. So for me, I think the advice, at least the hope that I share with our students is do better than we've done. This is your country. This is going to be your generation that is going to have to inhabit a lot of the institutions and the habits that we may not have done so well in creating. And we need you to help us and for you to play a role in repair. But we need repair.
Thank you. You both talked about forming young people to go out into the world as citizens and leaders. Some people might ask, how is the formation that goes on at the university level for citizenship different from, if at all, from K through 12 or primary and secondary citizenship formation?
Well, I'll take the first shot at that. I think there is a place for it, by the way, in K-12. And Ron, you kind of alluded to that. And I think that's an important discussion. But maybe more germane to the question is, what's the difference between somebody that's, in that 12 to 16, 17 years old compared to the 19 to 24-year-old age range? And there's no doubt that that is a significant maturation process in a young person's life. This is the biggest change socially in an adult's life. This is a time for mental and academic maturation as well. So the point of all that is, not to mention the physical changes that somebody's going through at that age. This is that time in life where you should be exposed to lots of different ideas, and you have the maturity to hear and be exposed to these different ideas and to enter into that dialogue, even when it's sometimes a little bit uncomfortable. And again, this goes back to some of that module I talked about earlier, listen, learn, and discuss. But I think those are conversations that are very worthy in the classroom. It even gets down to the conversation about who's in the classroom. So, as a flagship for the state of Ohio, we're proud that 70% of our students are Ohioans. That means roughly 30% are not Ohioans, which means they're from the other 49 states. But also, we have on any given time, 8 or 9% of our students are international students. And I think that's an important part of that dialogue, to get that perspective. Not all of our students will have the chance to go travel and get an overseas academic experience or an immersed opportunity. So to have those international students often in the classroom, particularly at the undergraduate level, I think is an important part of that from that perspective, so that you can get such that well-rounded discussion.
Thank you, Tim. Ron?
I don't think I can add a whole lot to that. I mean, I think this Ted's really captured powerfully that the idea that what you can do with a student, were we to be doing it, and that's the problem, we're not doing it, but were we to do it with a student who's in grade 7, 8, and the kind of conversation and exploration that you can do of similar subjects at a university level is night and day, and particularly under the tutelage of faculty who have expertise and knowledge in the domains to be able to explore these things in a much more rigorous way. So I think there's a role here that naturally complements what in an ideal world would be happening within K-12 education. But I come back to the sad reality, it's not happening, and not nearly at the level we need it to. So it's not just a deepening of knowledge that's already there. In many cases, it may be the first formal exposure that students have to some of these ideas. Let me give a really, to my mind, sobering example. Years ago, when I was when there was a number of incidents on campuses where there was student protests and there was deplatforming and basically upending of events that were taking place on campus. The disruption became so serious that, as you know, you recall these events that speakers couldn't speak, and there was the termination of these events, which of course is completely antithetical to the idea of the university, where the views, no matter how provocative or painful, are expressed, are challenged, and debate takes place. But that's not what was happening. So we, like so many other institutions, quickly decided on remedial activity, which is, again, using our orientation week. But we decided we would have basically a 1.5 hour introductory lecture on the role of academic freedom, its connection to the First Amendment, and how central this was to the university, but also to America. And I got to tell you that as I saw the planning for this event, and basically the provost was up there with on a dais with 3 or 4 colleagues representing a number of different disciplines, but also critically a number of different political perspectives, I thought I was almost kind of embarrassed that the students were going to find this anodyne and pedantic. It was like, we've heard this all before, and give me a break. Why are you doing this to us? I thought, we're in university. Do we really have to be exposed to what I thought were fairly rudimentary and widely understood ideas? And I watched this in the back of the lecture hall the first time this happened, and students stayed engaged through the course of this. But as they were leaving, I pulled a few of the students aside and said, "What'd you think of this?" And they said they thought it was great. I said, "But come on, you've seen this all before. Like, what did you find? Did we do it better?" I said, "We never knew. Like, we weren't taught this." And I'm saying this is foundational, like foundational ideas to America. So again, I think this goes back and really underscores the extent to which we have to fix it in K-12, and then I think we have to complement it. But until it's fixed at K-12, we got to do the remedial work.
Thank you. So we had asked all of you to submit questions, and we'll turn to some of our pre-submitted questions. So President Daniels, you published your book 6 years ago. How many years ago?
Something like that.
Okay.
5, 4.
So the question is, has President Daniels noted any changes, positive or negative, in the educational environment after his book was published?
Oh, where to start? I'm trying to think of how this lined up with, I wrote it during the pandemic, and then, of course, it was during George Floyd protest, and then, of course, coming back from pandemic into October 7th and the follow-on, and then, the challenges that we face today. It's been a tumultuous, indeed, I would say a convulsive time in higher education. And the premise of the book, which is, one, as I said before, universities are an important institution for democracy. But more than that, as we think about what we can do and how we can serve democracy in a number of different areas, everything from ensuring social mobility, giving opportunities for students from all backgrounds to realize the American dream, to thinking about the discussion we're having today around educating for democracy, to thinking about how we model pluralism, to how we properly quit our role as guardians of fact and truth in society, and really see ourselves with an odd set of arrangements of tenure and academic freedom. We're a place apart, but we have those attributes because we play a special role in certifying truth. Those are all the ways in which we can contribute to democracy, and why, again, I believe we're essential for it. But whether we've done that perfectly in each of those areas, I think is less clear. And in fact, the argument of the book is that we haven't. There's a number of areas where I think we have faltered, and we have responsibilities to change the way in which we are recruiting, educating, certifying fact, ensuring the reproducibility of our results, and so forth. And so to the extent that that critique, self-critique, was there a few years ago, I think it's fair to say that, that it's only, the critique around us has only grown in fervor and intensity to the point where at least one public official has called universities the enemy. And so, it's in that setting, we, I think, have to really hear, as hard as it is in this moment, the critique against us, to listen carefully and evaluate critically whether there's some things that we need to do better in order to ensure that we continue to enjoy the support and confidence of our fellow citizens. And in particular, the thing I worry, and I know Ted, you do as well, but this amazing, amazing compact that we have with the federal government that has done so much for our country, and I think so much for the world, in terms of the bounty that's come from our institutions. If we don't respond to some of the things that are out there that are persistently being leveled against us, I fear that the whole thing could come undone, and that would be tragic.
President Carter, do you want to comment? I've got a question for you as well.
Oh, I don't want to comment on Ron's book. I'm just going to say it's great. But his comments, I completely agree with. In fact, for many in this audience here, you've heard me speak publicly. One of the reasons I wanted to come to The Ohio State University was to be part of this conversation, knowing that higher education was already under attack. This goes back a couple of years. The change was on the horizon. And all of us have a responsibility to become better communicators for what we do. And quite frankly, my perspective is the best ambassadors for the future of higher education are going to be these young people that we graduate. They're the ones that are the chosen customers. They came to our universities to get their degree, and as they go into the workplaces, they go to be the next generation of citizens. They're the ones that we need to enlist to go out there and tell their story of why they went to Johns Hopkins, why they went to Harvard, why they went to Yale, why they went to UCLA, why they came to The Ohio State University, and what did they get for it? And that's when I think the conversation will really start to change for the nation. I think that's a critical part that we're a little bit missing.
Thank you both. President Carter, you had mentioned the percentage of international students at Ohio State, and one of the questions refers to that. With the influx of international students to America's leading research universities, how can we balance the traditional goals of American higher education for citizenship education and civic equality while making it relevant to non-American students? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, my experience, and it doesn't jump out in my resume, but I ran the U.S. Naval War College up in Newport, Rhode Island. It's an institution that was founded in 1888. It's one of the oldest of its kind in the world, and it's really a center that then Undersecretary of the Navy Teddy Roosevelt had envisioned to study the precursors of war and actually to help prevent war. But one of the principles there was to educate most, if not all, of the top international naval officers. And with a student body of roughly only about 1,000, a third of them were international students. And I got to witness the power of what that meant, the value of what it meant to educate those international naval officers. Some from countries that were opposed to each other and were actually in active combat at the time that they'd be in school, and yet they could all get along. It was amazing. I see that same thing in private and public higher education institutions. I think it's so important for us to have that exposure for not only our students from the state of Ohio as a land-grant institution, to get that broader exposure out there, to include that in the research laboratories, to see that perspective. And then I think there's also a responsibility, and we can argue about which students from which countries we have here to have the privilege of getting those doctoral degrees and master's degrees and undergraduate degrees. But we also have the opportunity to change the view of our country through our education system for what they will take back to their countries, because a lot of them won't necessarily stay here, but for some period of time and then go back. And I see great value in that.
President Daniels, any comment?
I just think, again, we have a key fundamental responsibility to educate American citizens, but I do believe having international students in our midst is in service of that goal. And again, we're at Hopkins, it's probably about 1/10 of the class is international, but on a range of different issues. The kind of exchange that Ted's talking about, it's really, again, it's another way in which you challenge your priors, where you realize, a lot of the core conundrums that we face, and how you reconcile freedom and equality, how you determine, where majorities can rule and where they have to be governed by constraints imposed through constitutional or other measures. One could go through a host of different areas and different policies where different countries have made different decisions from ours. And it's really good to be challenged, to see that, and for the opportunity to explore what might be appropriate or less appropriate modifications to our own arrangements and ideas. So I just think it, again, in a period of life when there's so much that is new to students as they dwell in our communities, having that exposure is really good for them, and I think it's good for the students from abroad who will go back home and they'll take a piece of America and this experience with them that I know in speaking to our graduates internationally, it's just wonderful to sense the affection for the experience that they had while they spent time with us.
Yeah, thank you both. We have time, I think, for one more question and another international focus. Amid rising nationalism worldwide, do you believe that global citizenship education is still necessary? If not, why? If yes, how do we make global citizenship education relevant in this day and age?
So I'll start and say, I think right now we need to focus on making good American citizens. And I think understanding American citizenship in the world matters, but I'll go back to fundamentals. We're in trouble in this country now, and we feel very fractious and fragile and angry. And I think that focusing on restoration of this ideal of American citizenship, what it entails, how we acquit it responsibly, is the foundation for everything. And our ability to be effective global citizens is going to turn first and foremost on making sure that our country is as strong and healthy as it can be and continues to serve as an inspiration for so many people throughout the world. So I think this idea of global citizenship is one that can grow from understanding our own fundamental responsibilities and values in America, but it shouldn't supplant it now.
President Carter?
I'll just add very briefly, I agree with Ron on this idea that we've got to focus on American citizenship first. I mean, we've got to make sure that we've got it right here. As somebody that has traveled all over the globe and been in more countries than I care to admit, I have a perspective of how important it was to understand the culture and how we were viewed as Americans, whether we were on ground or in international waters or in coastal waters in my time in the Navy. But I did see the value of that in my real life education as a naval officer, and I wish we had more of that exposure for our students. Not all of them, but certainly a large cross-section to give them that international educational opportunity, which is where you start to build in that global citizenship. So I think there's a place for it.
Can I just get one follow-up question? Because I've been thinking about something, Ted, you said earlier that I just keep returning to as I'm sitting on this podium. That is, I really need to explore what it was like to be a student in your mother's class for multiple years in high school. So like seriously, did she call on you? Like was there an understanding when you go home, you didn't discuss what happened in the day?
This is a great opportunity for her to talk about the dynamics in my family. My dad was a staunch conservative in the state of Rhode Island, and my mother was a raging liberal. But for those of a certain age that might remember the Gomer Pyle series,
Oh yeah.
the drill sergeant was called Sergeant Carter. That was what my mother's nickname was. So all the students called my mother Sergeant Carter, and I took the wrath of that. There was also this idea that I knew all the questions to all the tests before they were handed out, which of course was not true. So as much as it sounded like a positive, it was a challenging time. But I will say this one thing. My mother did teach me to write a little bit. And by the time I got to the Naval Academy, I played ice hockey. I was an oceanography physics major. I met my wife there. But I was also the editor of the school magazine. And that was a fact that my mom was more proud of than anything else I ever did. So there you go.
Sounds like she prepared you for the military.
She definitely did.
Well, this hour has gone by really quickly. Please join me in thanking our guests.